I would like to read out a report from the BBC, which I think raises a number of moral questions. I'm going to read out the report first and then discuss some of the issues. But before I do that, just a quick word. If you leave a comment on one of my videos, I do try to get around comments, but if I don't reply to individual comments, please don't take it personally. It's just that I have a large volume of videos, and as such get quite a lot of comments on them. So simply for practical reasons, I can't get around everyone, but I will try and respond to as many as possible. Okay, so this is a report I want to read out. Bear with me. It's relatively long, but the details are important. Well, it's not excessively long actually. Iraq lawyer Phil Shiner, assume that's pronounced Shiner, struck off over misconduct. A human rights lawyer who brought abuse claims against UK troops after the Iraq War has been struck off for misconduct. Phil Shiner from the now defunct law firm Public Interest Lawyers had 12 charges of misconduct proved against him by a panel of the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal. He had admitted acting recklessly by publicly claiming UK troops unlawfully killed, tortured, and mistreated Iraqis. The Defence Secretary said Mr. Shiner had made soldiers' lives a misery. Sir Michael Fallon told the BBC he was delighted that Mr. Shiner had been exposed. Decent thing for him to do now would be to apologise, he said. In 5 of the charges found proved, he was found to have acted dishonestly, including agreeing to pay sweeteners to a fixer, named only as Z in tribunal papers but understood to be called Mazin Yunus, to persuade him to change his evidence to the 31 million al-Swedi inquiry. The 5-year investigation ruled in 2014 that allegations of murder and torture made against British soldiers by Iraqi detainees were deliberate lies. Mr. Shiner previously admitted 9 allegations of acting without integrity, including that he had made unsolicited approaches to potential clients. Colonel James Coote, who was a major based in Basra, said the accusations brought by Mr. Shiner would inevitably have left emotional scars. We can't turn the clock back, he said. Nothing will undo the decade or so that my soldiers, their families, and indeed my family have been through, he said. Personally speaking, it has been difficult, but I feel now that chapter is certainly behind us. Clearly, there is still one chapter open, which we will not comment on now, but I think certainly it has been a very harrowing experience. Mr. Shiner did not attend the hearing, having written to the tribunal to say he was unwell and could not afford to pay for a defence lawyer. The tribunal heard in December that he accepted he would be struck off as a result of the case, thought to be one of the most expensive ever brought by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Andrew Tabachik, representing the SRA, accused Mr. Shiner of being in a state of avoidance to prevent proceedings from going ahead in full. The hearing finished earlier than expected as a result of Mr. Shiner's absence. As a team leader at PIL, Mr. Shiner authorised and procured payments and fee sharing agreements with the agent Z between 2007 and 2010. The tribunal also ordered Mr. Shiner to pay interim costs of £250,000. A second solicitor from PIL, John Dickinson, was reprimanded by the tribunal and ordered to pay £2,000 costs after he admitted that he failed to keep al-Swedi clients properly informed about the progress of the inquiry. SRA Chief Executive Paul Phillips said he welcomed the tribunal's decision to strike off Mr. Shiner. It is important that solicitors can bring forward difficult cases, but the public must be able to place their trust in them, he said. His misconduct has caused real distress to soldiers, their families, and to the families of Iraqi people who thought that their loved ones had been murdered or tortured. More than £30 million of public funds were spent on investigating what proved to be false and dishonest allegations. The tribunal aims to publish its decision within 7 weeks, after which Mr. Shiner would have 21 days to appeal. The Iraq Historic Allegations team will review cases brought by Mr. Shiner and make a decision over whether or over which should no longer be pursued. Sir Michael Fallon said in a statement, "Justice has finally been served after we took the unprecedented step of submitting evidence on his abuse of our legal system. Phil Shiner made soldiers' lives a misery by putting false claims of torture and murder. Now he should apologise. We will study any implications for outstanding legal claims closely." Okay, that was a bit of a lengthy read. I probably didn't need to read all of that, but basically this lawyer um, had brought claims against the army, and he's now been found to be guilty of misconduct. Um, I personally think this would appear to amount to perverting the course of justice. So I think being struck off, I think there should be some charges against him, surely, for perverting the course of justice. Um, there's a lot of things to take from this case. Firstly, for the men and women who have been accused of these alleged abuses, it must have been a really turbulent experience to have come back from a war zone and then have these claims brought against you and to have, well, it appears years of uncertainty over what was going to happen, all because this guy was dishonest and went about things in a dishonest manner. Um, but there are sort of additional issues around this, and there's a few things I want to discuss. Firstly, Sir Mike Jackson, former general, was interviewed by BBC Newsnight, and he basically highlighted the things that Sir Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, was saying. But the journalist also said, but do you agree that lawyers should pursue cases where there is a possibility that abuses have occurred? And one well-known cited example is Baha Musa, who was an Iraqi national abused by British troops. Um, I find cases like this are very difficult because a lot of members of the public get very emotionally charged over anything to do with the military. And I do feel it sort of ties into what I was saying about right wing political correctness. Now, first of all, in this case, it's a disgrace what this guy has done, and I think being struck off isn't enough. I think he should face charges of misconduct over perverting the course of justice if that proves to be the case. Um, I mean, it's unacceptable what he's put these soldiers through. Um, and that's a good point about Iraqi families also, being fed false information about what happened to their relatives. But there are a lot of moral issues to discuss with this. Um, there are some people who take the school of thought that in a war zone anything goes, and their logic is that because terrorists, because insurgents, do such brutal things, then we should fight fire with fire. I have to say I don't agree with that logic because if we use the same techniques as they do, if we go down that path, then we no longer cease we no longer cease to be we no longer are, I should say, a professional army. We then just become as bad as they are. And the whole point about being a professional army is that there are certain rules of war that no matter how despicable the opponent is, you don't get involved in. Another thing that makes me uneasy about this case is because of this guy's dishonesty, because of his selfish behaviour, it's going to mean that any legitimate cases that might be brought are going to be dealt with great skepticism because people are going to say, oh, it's these slimy lawyers out to, destroy soldiers' lives. Well, that's difficult because, firstly, I believe that the British Army, and call me biased because I'm British, but I do believe that we have one of the most professional armies in the world. And it is important to remember that unlike the likes of ISIS, there is internal disciplinary procedures. I mean, ISIS deliberately targets civilians. If a British soldier targets civilians, there's very strict consequences within the army system of disciplinary procedures, as there should be. One thing that does make me uneasy sometimes is there's a reactionary response from a really nationalistic, very right wing sort of mentality that basically say the mentality is that soldiers are above scrutiny. And that is a mentality I totally reject. I think if someone abuses their position, whether they are a soldier or a police officer or any sort of public figure, they have to be held to account. I don't sort of go along the lines of, well, they're in a difficult job and they're very brave, therefore they're above scrutiny. Where there are cases, where there are allegations, they have to be pursued. And I know that's not a popular thing to say because the tabloids whip up this thing about our boys, and I do understand that, but where there are cases, they have to be pursued. Now, to be fair, Sir Mike Jackson actually agreed with that, and I think Michael Fallon would as well, and I feel most big brass in the army would agree, and that's what makes the British Army one of the best in the world, if not the best, because there is that professional level of internal discipline. So what this guy has done is caused problems for everyone. He's accused innocent people. He's put Iraqi families in a limbo because they don't know the fate of their loved ones. He has wasted money, um, and he's made the job of other lawyers more difficult who may be pursuing legitimate claims. Um, so it's problematic in a lot of areas. Now, back just to discuss the moral issues a little bit. Like I say, there is a school of thought that we cannot expect our soldiers to go into war and not use the same technique as the insurgents. I don't agree with that because, let's say, for the sake of argument, a British unit gets a suspected militant and they torture him. I'm not saying that's happened, but this is a scenario. Would that be morally justified because they would possibly do the same thing to, I don't know, an Iraqi interpreter or whatever? We'll have to remember that soldiers are human beings, they're not robots, and they go through something that most of us cannot imagine. I mean, I'm not sitting here in the comfort of the UK pretending I know what it's like, but it is legitimate that there is a level of conduct that becomes of a professional army, and I don't think that is an unpatriotic thing to say, because actually I think it would damage the reputation of the British Army. It was actually endanger this country as well from a security perspective. If, let's say, for the sake of argument, there was widespread evidence of British soldiers abusing their position. Um, so basically, what I'm saying is lawyers should have that that freedom to do their job. But in cases like this, I mean, what he's put these soldiers through is disgraceful. And these are not wealthy people. They're regular soldiers who don't have the sort of money that he's used to dealing with. So I'm very sympathetic to those soldiers, and I also think that people need to be understanding of what soldiers go through. But I do reject the idea that anything goes because it's a war zone. It would simply not be true to suggest that British soldiers have always behaved in a morally upstanding way. That simply is not true. It wasn't true in Northern Ireland. It wasn't true in India. It wasn't true in other examples. And I'm not saying that to slander the army. The overwhelming majority of soldiers are professional, highly disciplined, highly skilled individuals. But in every large group of people, you're going to have some bad apples. And I think anyone that wants to deny this is kidding themselves. Not every soldier is a morally upstanding person. There are some soldiers who, whether it's from vigilantism or whether it's because of the conditions that they're facing, they will do things um, that they should not be doing. I mean, it's not that I have any sympathy with terrorists. It's rather that I don't. I'm aware of the perception of double standards that actually would only aid the jihadist propaganda. I mean, they're going to have propaganda anyway. I understand that, but if there are cases where, let's say, civilians are abused by troops and nothing is done, that leads straight into the hands of propagandists. So it is very, very important that these cases are pursued, um, whether right wing tabloids like it or not. So I don't think that lawyers should be in a position of kind of being silenced because of, allegations that they're unpatriotic or they're attacking our boys or something like that. But in this case, clearly this guy is corrupt, and I don't think it's enough that he's been struck off. I think you know he needs to face justice himself because he is potentially, he has really put enormous stress on innocent people. So that's disgraceful. But there's a lot of things to take away from that. But the bottom line is, the overwhelming majority of soldiers do behave in a professional manner. But in individual cases where people abuse their position, and there have been cases, so let's not pretend that there hasn't. There has been cases. Um, and it's one thing if we're talking about a Taliban fighter, but abusing civilians, if there's clear cases of that happening, Baha Musa was not an insurgent; he was a civilian. So I'm well aware that I'm subjecting myself to the possibility of, you know, aggressive Daily Express reading EDL types saying, "Oh, I'm not interested in that sort of mentality. The only thing I care about is truth. That's it, and that's all." Um, so yeah, shame on this guy, and I just hope it doesn't derail the process in the future. And this also applies for soldiers. In cases where soldiers have been treated unfairly, they should have the right to have justice on their side as well. Um, so this has to be universal. But that's the bottom line, and I don't think, and I don't like the way that certain tabloids were dealing with this because I think they were, they were just coming out and really stirring up public sentiments on this, and I don't agree with that approach at all. I think there has to be simply an internal inquiry, and it looks like it's a legal panel that held this guy to account. I think he should face charges for perverting the courts of justice. And yeah, he should apologize to those troops directly and sincerely. Um, Let me know your thoughts. If you're in the armed forces, please don't get me wrong. I genuinely respect that people in the armed forces take risks most of us cannot imagine, and they put themselves in harm's way for this country. So I am absolutely fundamentally respectful of that. But I do insist that in cases where there are allegations, they have to be pursued. And the army must take that very seriously, as I believe they do. Let me know your thoughts.